Good Monday to you all. I hope you are doing well. I just wanted to do a little bit of news roundup here at Church Public, and unfortunately, they are both coming for your children and burning down churches. Welcome to Church Public. Let's get started. All right, welcome back to Church Public. Thank you so much for joining me here today. My name is Matt Odegaard, and I am your host. We are trying to find the connection between faith and culture and view these cultural events in a biblical worldview. And there are a lot of events going on. I started writing out my Monday News Roundup, and about 4 hours later, after scouring the news for all kinds of shenanigans, I'm just going to hit these top two and hit a couple more tomorrow because there is just so much going on, as you probably have seen in the news. I mean, even things like the protests in Cuba, I really want to talk about that. I don't have time for that today. And some banjo guitar things, which everybody wants to know about the banjo, right? Don't they? Don't they? It's fine. At any rate, if you haven't already, subscribe. Give me a review. If you're listening on Apple Music or Spotify or Google or YouTube or whatever, go to churchpublic.com, subscribe to any one of these places so that you get the notification that I'm doing something else, because I want you to be informed. I am not doing this for me. In fact, a lot of this I don't want to do. Some days I wake up and go, I don't really want to talk about this because I feel like I say the same things over and over again, and this world keeps doing the same things over and over again. So that is why, one, I think we need to know. We need to know what this world is doing so that, two, we can know what the biblical response is and how we are supposed to live in this world. My goal is for you to understand this world so that you can be in it and not become of it. That's Jesus' words to us. Jesus really wanted us to understand what was going on in this world and understand that we are not meant for this world, but in fact, we're supposed to live differently than this world. And a lot of times we end up living about the same. That's the problem. So thank you so much for listening, for supporting. If you feel like sharing, I appreciate that too, because again, I just want people to understand what is going on in this crazy world. Well, you probably have heard some of this song. It got really viral over the end of last week, and I unfortunately am going to have to play a little bit of it for you, but this is the San Francisco, let me just read some of this. The San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus singing a song titled "A Message from the Gay Community." Sounds innocuous enough until you realize that their message is, quote, "We are coming for your children." So I guess without further ado, sadly, here is some of that for your ears.
Think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked. Funny, just this once, you're correct. We'll convert your children. Happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. We're coming for your children.
Okay, so that was some of that, and I'll play you more in just a moment as if you needed more, but at any rate, this is the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. They are saying things like, quote, but you're just frightened. You think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked. Funny, just this once, you're correct, end quote. It does go on to say, we'll convert your children. Someone's got to teach them not to hate. We are coming for them. We are coming for your children. We are coming for them. We're coming for them. On and on and on. Yeah, I'm just going to play a little bit more because, again, context is everything. Here you go.
We're coming for them. We're coming for your children. We're coming for them. We're coming for your children. We're coming for them.
Yeah, it's almost like I have nothing to say about this because that was enough, but I do have to talk about it. I have to talk about it because we have to talk about things that are going on in the culture, and when people tell you what they plan to do, you should listen to them and believe them. Now, this video was posted by that chorus, and after just a few hours, it received, according to my notes, 88 likes and 5,000 or more dislikes. That's being called that's called ratioed in the community, in the social media land, and that just means that way more people disliked it. And in fact, as of right now, they've deleted it and are very unhappy. They say they have received a lot of violent threats and things. So that is not okay. It's not okay to promote violence. It is not okay to threaten people in that way. I, hopefully, if you're listening, am not doing that. All I want to say is this type of ideology pushing forward to, I'll just speak for me, my children, and maybe you can speak for you, your children, is not what I'm looking for in the world. Now, that's probably obvious if you're listening to this. Obviously, my values are biblical, and my values are to move towards what God has for us in His perfect plan. But they go on to say in their statement that they, apparently me, and others, have taken the lyrics out of context, this is a quote, to support a narrative that suits their intolerant and hateful needs. Continuing the quote, it's obvious the tongue-in-cheek humor is lost on many, end quote. I can't believe this is tongue-in-cheek. And maybe it was. Maybe it was supposed to be a funny joke, but it's one of those jokes where I used to have a friend who would say, all sarcasm is based in truth. And I think that is a valuable lesson for us today. And again, absolutely true. I tend to be, in my real life, a little bit of a sarcastic person, and I try to inhibit that a little bit when I talk to you all, but occasionally it will come out. At the same time, all sarcasm is based in truth. And in fact, the best comedy is based in something true. The best comedy is when you take a part of life or a part of culture and then you just like turn it a little bit to look at it in a different way and make fun of it. And then maybe the best comics, what I would say, is actually expose a little bit of what is going on in the world through comedy, and then we can all laugh at each other and hopefully get better. This is not that. This is not tongue-in-cheek. This is not it's just not saying something that's not true. And if again, they clearly are coming for your children, and we've looked at that. And you don't have to believe me. You don't have to listen to me at all. But just look back at almost every news story, and look back at the whole month of June. That was Pride Month, and every woke corporation changing their logo to a pride color, the rainbow color, for the whole month of June. And then all of a sudden, all those logos are back. And look at Nickelodeon, which we looked at before, and look at Blue's Clues, we looked at before, and look at the Drag Queen Story Hour in many libraries around the country, and on and on. They clearly are coming for your children. It's not tongue-in-cheek. It may be soft selling it. It's not even doing that. I don't know what to say. I'm not going to make excuses for them. It's just ridiculous. It's just ridiculous that they not only are doing this, but now that they're saying they're doing it, and of course, it seems like the reason they had to pull their video down to make it private and not allow anyone to look at it anymore. I don't know if you can find it anywhere on the YouTubes anymore. It was pulled down pretty quickly, and then from my understanding, they wrote a lot of letters and things to all the social media places. This may even get pulled down because of that, but they wrote letters that if this video is shown, that subsequent video will also be torn down. So this video might not last very long either. But we still have to talk about these things, and I'm not afraid to talk about these things because we have to know this is how this particular ideology and the culture of this world views you as a conservative parent, views you as a parent who is trying to operate within the framework of the Bible. That is how they view you. That is what they're going for, and they couch it in this idea. I read for you some of the lyrics that they want to teach you tolerance and respect. But the reality is that tolerance and respect based on something we can all agree on, or is it tolerance only if it is agreeing with this organization and the whole culture that backs it up? That's the big question, right? This tolerance and respect is not based on biblical love, biblical justice, biblical truth. It is based on you. It's the same thing that we talked about with some of the current administration that is leading the country that says, I really want unity. And the unity I want is you agree with me and then we'll be united. But if you disagree with me, you get songs like this where we're coming for your children and you are not going to have a choice but to agree with me. And that's the problem. Now, here's the deal. These people don't love Jesus, obviously, and they're not following Jesus. And I'm not going to judge their lifestyle. it's not my place to do that. I can pray for them. I can hope they find God. But when you start saying outright that you are coming for my children, I take offense to that. Your job is not to indoctrinate my children into your gender or sexual ideology. I don't agree with that ideology. My biblical worldview doesn't agree with that. I'm going to have to defer to the creator of the universe and teach my children in that way. So, public school system, San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus, Nickelodeon, Blues Clues, PBS, Drag Queen Story Hour. I'm sorry, you are not the ones who are going to teach my children about fairness and equality. It's just not the way my worldview works, because my worldview is based on the reality of God and the reality of the Bible and the reality of even, again, as we've talked about, natural order and natural law. And the things that we're talking about here are not, they're not the natural world. They're not the real world. And you can want to have this. And this is where it gets emotional for people. And you may have already tuned out because you don't like to hear this, but if you want to do things the way you want to do them, go ahead and try. But the reality is, your feelings about something, your desire for something, your wish for something to be true doesn't mean that it's going to be true. And that's a hard statement, because that hurts. It hurts all the way from when my 2-year-old started saying they wanted certain things, through the rest of your life. I know that you are sitting there and you want certain things in your way. Unfortunately, the reality of the world, the reality of God's kingdom, as I'll bring it back to, you don't always get your way. And that is painful sometimes, but it doesn't make it any less real. And that's the really hard part about this. So yes, we should pray for them. Yes, we should hope that they can find people that love them and will show them and talk to them about the truth. We should definitely not, hear me very clearly, there should be no violence, and we need to learn how to love people. That is our job as followers of God. We need to learn how to love people. But you also can't say to me, I'm going to convert your children, and for me to say, yeah, sure, do whatever you want. That's not going to happen either. So I can stand for the truth, not my truth, the truth that, one, my children are going to learn sexual values based on the real world and based on the Bible. And two, I'm the parent. I'm the parent of my kids, and therefore I know better than you do about my kids. For that matter, I know better than the school system does about my kids. And we'll come to some other articles coming in this week that are crazy things going on in the school system, but we'll get to that a little bit later. What I also wanted to talk about today is Canada. And I've been watching Canada more and more. We talked about a bunch of pastors that were arrested for holding church during the lockdowns for presumed COVID lockdown. They just wouldn't agree with the COVID lockdowns, so they kept their churches open and gave people the agency, gave people the responsibility to say whether they want to go to church. And yet they've arrested several pastors now. I did read, I think just a couple days ago, that the latest one, Pastor Stevens, was released a few days ago. So that's great news. But this is just kind of a weird story, and it's a little convoluted, and all the facts are not even yet out. But we do need to talk about it because, again, I've lumped together, and intentionally so, these Western countries like America, like England, and like Canada, and even Australia to some degree. These are all westernized countries, and so we've moved sort of together in these ways, both in worldview and in biblical values. I know that's very generalized, but it's important to kind of feel that, and it's important to know that if something can happen in Canada, something can happen in America, and if something does happen in England, it very likely can happen in America. It just can, because the leaders of all these countries at this very moment are very much aligned in the way that they view the world. So the thing that happened in Canada, this is, again, it's a rather convoluted story, so I'm just going to report a little bit of it. But apparently, recently there were a bunch of unmarked, or some even said mass graves, found from some of the indigenous people groups in Canada where the deaths occurred in some sort of church-run school. There may have even been abuse in some of these schools. The fact of the matter is we don't really know, because most of these deaths occurred many, many decades, if not longer, ago. So on the one hand, I will say that's terrible, and we should investigate these things. The appropriate authorities should investigate these things. They should institute whatever justice they can. Whatever justice is possible and appropriate should be taken in these situations. If the leaders of the church are still around, if any persecution can be made. Again, many of these things took place decades, if not longer ago. So it is an atrocity if some of these abuses happen, but we also know abuses happen all over the place in all kinds of institutions. So it's not unique in that sense, but it's still terrible. Now, the response is what I want to get to, not from the government, but from people. And it's not even all indigenous groups, which we're going to look at and find out in a moment, but at this point, as far as I looked this morning, 20 churches have been burned down. Over 20 churches in Canada have been burned down in response to these graves being found, in the interest of some sort of retributive justice for the indigenous peoples. They're burning down churches. They've burned down a Vietnamese church. I think one of the churches, again, it's a little bit spotty and it is a little bit convoluted, but there were definitely people in the indigenous community in a couple of these churches that got burned down. Again, I don't believe anybody was killed in them, but they're burning down churches as a response to this perceived or possible injustice. Again, we don't know all of the facts. Some of the graves, even the unmarked graves, were not unmarked necessarily, but the markers, because it has been so long, were just either misplaced or moved, and they're beginning to find some of these things as they look into it. Again, we need to investigate some of these things. This is another instance of, hey, maybe let's take a pause, see what the facts of the matter are really, and then figure out whatever the justice should be. That's an important thing to keep in mind. So these churches are being burned down, and the larger point that we need to make is, and what a couple of the reports that I read are, many of the people burning down these churches are not even the indigenous people, but they are, for lack of a better word, because this is the identity groups that the left has chosen, some kind of white, liberal, leftist protesters. And I hate labels. And I'm going to keep railing on that. I hate this identity group politics that we have to be thrown into. I don't like it, and I don't want to refer to it. But unfortunately, apparently that's what we have to do, because that's the way they want to separate and literally segregate the world. And I don't like this. We'll continue to talk more about that. But there even were indigenous people, like this person named Jesse Allen, who is an indigenous person and a pastor, called for people to quit burning down churches. They say, quote, "Burning down churches is not in solidarity with indigenous people. We do not destroy people's places of worship," end quote. I mean, that's a great quote. Let's not burn people's churches down. Let's not burn people's place of worship down. The reason that I bring up this story, and the reason that I think it matters, is there is a war on Christianity in the world, and a lot of this, and I know again, it's convoluted and it comes through all sorts of different ways, but a lot of people are looking for answers in this world to the questions they have of the soul that don't involve God. In other words, people really don't want to be dependent on God. They don't want to make their foundation on God. It's clear even by the choir piece that we mentioned earlier that this whole group's foundation in fairness and tolerance, they want to have that, but they want to have that apart from biblical values. They want to have it apart from the values that God has for this world and for you and for me and for our families. Therefore, they have to make up their own values on this system. And then you extend that out and you see people burning down churches, and there are a couple things going on here. One is they're trying to solve justice on their own because they don't believe in the justice system, because by and large, as we've talked about, you can go back and listen to the July 4th episode, the rules that we put in place in this country, again, similar, not the same, but similar to the rules in Canada and England and Australia and some other countries, are based on the rule of law that God gives us, specifically and largely the 10 Commandments. But if you cannot believe in God, I didn't say don't, I said if you cannot believe in God, if your worldview cannot allow a God who is above you, who is telling you either you're right or you're wrong, then you have to find justice somewhere else. And that's what happens in both of these instances. We have to convert your children because you cannot be responsible for teaching your children the right thing. Therefore, we have to step in and do this for you. We're going to burn down your church because you cannot possibly, whether it's the church or the government or whatever institution, you cannot possibly find the justice that this situation requires. So we are going to step in and take care of this justice for you. This is what we are seeing. And at the root of it all is this hate for God, because you have to destroy God in order to put something else in his place. And these situations, while grotesque and terrible in terms of who knows what abuses were foisted on these poor children in these schools, we don't know the reality of that situation, but the response of burning down places of worship, of trying to literally remove God from the face of the earth personally, is clearly not the right response. And more, as I review some of these things, as I look at what's happening here in America, in Canada, in England, in Australia, and of course in other countries like Iran, China, and Turkey, and a bunch of other places, the persecution of Christians in this world is growing and growing. We were, as I've mentioned many times, on a little bit of a decline in the sense of persecution of Christianity because of some of the free speech rules, free expression of religion rules, and other things that some of these countries have put in place, and that by and large is going out the window. It seems slowly at first, but to me it seems like it is escalating. And I don't mean to be a doomsday predictor. I'm not saying that, because for 2,000 years there have been very few times where the church has been the biggest proponent of the government. In other words, I didn't mean to say proponent. There have been few times where the church has been favored by the government. I'll say it that way. And yet, the church has survived. The church has survived for more than 2,000 years. And I read the end, and you can go ahead and read the end of this as well. We know from Jesus, we know from John's prophecy in Revelation that God is going to win in the end. And I'm not worried about that. But as we live in this world, that's the thing that you need to know as a believer. If you call yourself a believer, if you're trying to follow God, if you're trying to figure out how to live in this world, you need to know that this world is more and more going to be against you. And therefore, what you have to figure out is, how are you going to stand? How are you going to stand up? And how are you going to stand against this world? And it's going to be harder and harder to do. And I guess what I'll end with, I'll just end with one more story, because it's not significant in terms of large impact, like this weird children's thing and like the churches in Canada being burned, but it is significant in that you see a person in this story standing up for what is important. So I reported a couple of weeks ago that the guitarist for Mumford & Sons, was in a little bit of trouble because he had sided with another reporter that was reporting on Antifa. Antifa, if you don't know, is the anti-fascist organization, or so it seems from its name, but in fact they were, and apparently continue to be, the sponsor of much of the domestic terrorism that has been going on all through 2020 and burning down cities and all kinds of other things, and continue to be violently, I can't even say protesting, but violently attacking places all over this country and sometimes beyond. That has been clearly shown over and over again, and there's a guy who wrote a book about it. The guitarist for Mumford & Sons said, hey, great job writing that book. It really helped us understand what is going on in the world. And after that quote, like I'll get the real quote for you here. His quote in his tweet was, quote, congratulations, the journalist is Andy No. Congratulations, Mr. Andy No. Finally had the time to read your important book. You're a brave man. That's it. That's all I wrote. Like, for that, the world came down upon him and said, how dare you support somebody like this, right? And so he, the guitarist, issued an apology. And at the time I said, it's unfortunate that he issued the apology, because you cannot, if you have not learned this already, you cannot out-apologize this group of people that's coming after you. I will apologize for something I directly do wrong. I will do that. It's not easy, but I will eat that humble pie and I will apologize for things that I really do wrong. But if you offend someone who is just offended because you're saying true things, you cannot apologize for true things because you'll never out apologize them. You'll never enter back into the good graces in this new religion of the secular progressivism or woke or whatever you want to call it. There is no forgiveness. They will only allow you back in if you are useful and they want you back in it, which they do sometimes, but most of the time they don't. So you cannot apologize yourself into it. Anyway, what I wanted to get to in this story now is he basically has retracted his latest apology and he has quit the band. What I want to say is thank you. Thank you for doing this, Marshall. I think this is a great choice for you. And I can only say this probably was a really difficult choice. We talked about a Hollywood actor the other day who basically bowed down to China when he got in trouble and his movie was not going to do as well if he didn't apologize to China. That's capitulating to these people that just want you to do whatever they say. I love this story because this person looked back and said, hey, I have to do the right thing, even if I lose my job over it, even if I lose my passion, my bandmates, whatever it is. I can't speak to how this decision hurt him, not just financially, but emotionally and all the time. I mean, I've been in bands before and you get very close to bandmates and you share these experiences together, and to essentially sever some of that relationship based on truth and your beliefs is a really hard thing to do. And that's what I continue to say here. If you stand up for Jesus, if you stand up for the truth, you're going to lose friends, you're going to lose family members, you may lose jobs and income and all these other things, and more it seems likely that's the direction we're going. But we have to begin to have courage. Courage is taking heart. We need to take heart, as Jesus says, and lean into what is right regardless of the consequences. I'm not saying be an idiot. I'm not saying go out and do dumb things. I'm saying prepare yourself to stand up, because that moment will come for you. I want you to know the moment is coming for you when you're going to have to make a choice. This will happen to you. I'm not saying if. It will happen. You'll have to make a choice whether you follow this world or whether you follow Jesus. Those are the only two paths that there are, and I want you to be ready for this, and I want you to not make a bad decision. I hope and I pray that you will make the decision of following Christ, because I think that is both the best and really the only decision that has the right eternal significance to it. But you're going to have to make that decision. I can't make it for you. Your family can't make it for you. Your friends, your workmates, no one can make this decision for you. You have to make it. And it may be a little thing that's based on a message, a social media, or a sentence you say somewhere, or if you happen to be walking around reading the Bible or something. I mean, people are going to notice certain things that you do if you're really living for Christ, and they're going to ask you about it. They may challenge you about it. They may make fun of you, especially if you're in school or a student. I guarantee if you're a student and you bring a Bible out in any public school in this country, people are going to say things. What are you going to do? What are you going to do about that? How are you going to respond? And it is not easy. I am in no way saying that it's easy, but I'm saying you have to prepare yourself for this. You have to prepare yourself for not only one moment, it may be a multitude of moments, but the beauty of it is, and even Aristotle, who is not a Christian, pointed this out, the more that character is a habit, and the more times that you do the right thing, the more times and the easier it is to do the right thing. The opposite is also true. The more times you do the wrong thing, the more times you lie, the more times you cheat and steal, the easier it is to do those wrong things too, because you develop a callous on your heart. But the right things can be a habit, and you can lean into this and do the right thing. So I just want to commend this guitarist, Winston Marshall from Mumford. Again, I love his guitar playing and other stringed instrument playing. But more than that, I just love his bravery in this, even though it was a tricky thing to do and he probably lost a little bit for it. I want to leave with his quote of a book that I really appreciate by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, which is a little bit of a thick book, but if you are in the interest of reading something that has value, I'm even going to reach back and grab it here. I don't usually reach back to my bookshelf. But the Gulag Archipelago, fantastic book. Again, a little bit thick, a little bit hard to get through, but his views of the world and the way that you need to stand up for what is true are fantastic. And this artist in Mumford had this quote from the book. And he who is not sufficiently courageous to defend his soul, don't let him be proud of his progressive views, and don't let him boast that he's an academician or people's artist, a distinguished figure or general. Let him say to himself, I am part of the herd and a coward. It is all the same to me as long as I am fed and keep warm. In other words, you have to stand up for what is right. That's the only way to go. And as Jesus would say, to always come back to the Bible, take heart, I have overcome the world. Jesus' words, take heart. It is the same word as courage. Have courage. Jesus has overcome the world, and he has made a way for you to live in this world and be in the world, but not of the world, as a follower of God. So I hope and pray that for you as you continue to keep the faith. See you next time.